A very good afternoon to all of you. I'm Palak Khanna, Communication Executive from TERI. It's my pleasure to invite you to the virtual policy dialogue on inclusive energy transitions. This policy dialogue is being organized as a part of SDG Charter under the Act for Earth initiative of TERI. Before we begin the event proceedings, we request all the speakers to turn on their cameras for a quick photo op. Thank you, everyone. I would request all the speakers to turn on their video when they speak. I have the pleasure to invite Dr. Shelly Kedia, Senior Fellow at Center for Sustainable Development Research and Leadership, TERI, to deliver the welcome address. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Palak. Greetings to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us for this virtual dialogue, which is a part of SDG Charter. And this dialogue is a part of the theme on inclusive energy transitions and SDG 7. So just to begin, over the years, we know that the just transition narratives, which was largely led, ahead of Rio +20 by ILO, it has transitioned from, issues around, just related to job related transitions to very specifically in the energy transitions discussions to aspects that is related to jobs, reskilling, also placement of jobs for people who would lose jobs in the fossil fuel sector. But however, when we talk as researchers, when we talk about energy transitions, we consider both the supply as well as the demand side of the energy systems. So what we feel that through this particular dialogue, we also want to flag that there are lots of aspects that relate to inclusion and socioeconomic aspects, including gender, that become an important issue which has to be considered by policymakers as well as researchers that pertain to the energy demand side. So when we are talking about agriculture, what are the inclusiveness related aspects? And we are very fortunate to have a representative from the Agriculture Ministry of India, Mr. Patel, who will share his perspectives. When we talk about industry, what are the inclusiveness related issues related to MSMEs? That becomes a very important topic. Also, when we talk about transport, since transport is such an important sector that enables mobility for people to carry out the day-to-day work, there are inclusiveness aspects and gender dimensions that become important there as well. So we thought that, through this dialogue and through pushing the concept of inclusive energy transitions, we will also, want to flag that there are inclusiveness aspects that needs to be considered for the demand side interventions when it comes to clean energy transitions. So some of the guiding question for the dialogue includes what are the implications of inclusive energy transitions in specific sectors, specific demand side energy sectors, including agriculture, MSMEs, and transport. What policy instruments can promote inclusive energy transitions? What are the barriers and challenges, including what are the data gaps to inform decision making in this regard? And how can clean energy transitions better factor gender dimensions? With this, I'd like to hand over the screen back to Palak. And, perhaps we have a study which our TERI team will be presenting to raise some of these issues. And, we can go through that so that this will also help us in framing the discussions forward in this event as we move forward. Over to you, Palak.
Thank you so much for the insights, ma'am. Now I invite Ms. Sahili Das, Associate Fellow TERI, and Ms. Rumpa Banerjee, Communication Associate TERI, to give the presentation on inclusive energy transitions.
Sahili, please unmute.
I'm audible. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible now.
Yeah, sorry for the inconvenience. So, good afternoon, everyone. This policy is based on our preliminary findings by TERI team. First of all, I would like to thank to all our partners, our authors, and our Mr. Ajay Shankar for his advising experts. So in WSDS 2022, TERI has launched Act for Earth program, under which we have two components, COP Compass and SDG Charter. This policy dialogue is focused on SDG 7, that is ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all under the SDG Charter. So the what Shelly already discussed about this, the just transition around coal is actually not gaining the discourse. Not It has been gaining discursive traction in these days, and the just transition they moved around the low carbon economy for based on creating decent job opportunities. But in the era of climate change, it should not be the it should not direct towards inclusivity. So we require transition towards renewable energy as well as climate negotiations that already the multilateral development banks focused on, and also we should focus on people-centered transitions that the International Energy Agency focused on. It's not why. Yeah, it's coming. So about the study, the main rationale of our study is that we saw the energy consumption for G20 countries is rising, and it will continue to rise for further development happens. And most of the policies are addressed towards energy supply side and where the demand side is also interventions are also emerging area. And for inclusivity, we should examine both supply and demand side. So here is the major gap, that demand side interventions with respect to inclusiveness. So in this study, we are aiming to analyze the policy instruments and trends for inclusive transition, energy transitions from energy system for demand side perspective in majorly in three sectors: agriculture, MSMEs and transport for G20 countries. So in the energy supply trends, what we can find, the only 12% of the total primary energy supply in G20 is the renewable energy, and in that the top three countries, those have highest share of renewable energy are Brazil, Indonesia, and India. However, the demand side picture is a little different. So the demand side, we can see the energy consumption of the G20 countries to the total world's energy consumption according to the 2019 data is the highest for China, USA, India, EU and Russia. So we can say that the percentage here actually as a whole, the G20s to the world consumption is around 76 to 78% over the time period 2000 to 2019. And we can from the right hand side figure, we can see the energy demand is actually increasing over time in G20 countries, the aggregate one, though the percentage share to world's energy demand has a slight trend of declining trend. So we can say that G20 countries, the demand is increasing, though the share is decreasing a little bit. So we can say that the energy supply side and demand side has a different picture, and India is in a little bit better position because they are the third nation for energy supply, renewable energy supply share, and also they have the significant demand. So this is the whole picture of G20 countries from energy demand side. The percentage here is actually significant for industry and transport sectors. Though that for agriculture and allied sector is minimal. So we can focus, since we saw that China, USA, India, EU and Russia has more energy demand. We are focusing on this 5 countries. So among G20 countries, the China has a energy consumption higher energy consumption in industry sector, and we saw that they have showing the declining trend from 2014 onwards, and almost constant around 20% from 2017 onwards. While USA has high consumption of energy in transport sector, and the trends are mostly like constant over the throughout the time period. India has highest consumption in both two sectors, industry and residential sector, where industry has shows increasing trend, and residential sector has decreasing trend. This is one like interesting result, but we will not discuss in this policy brief. We have a different policy brief tomorrow on this. So apart from that, EU has the high energy consumption in transport, industry and residential sector, and in both the sectors, industry sector it has declining trend, transport it has rising trend, and residential they have constant trend almost. And in Russia, again, industry, transport, and residential sector consumes the highest energy, and they have all three has almost constant trend around 20 to 30% over the time period 2000 to 2009. So, focusing on the policies we have in agriculture sector, so energy is actually required in each step of agricultural value chain, from inputs to end users, like everywhere, for irrigation system, on-farm mechanization, greenhouse temperature control, space water heating, crop drying, lighting, ventilation, refrigeration, etc. Everywhere we need energy system. And the main use of energy in production, like agriculture production, is irrigation purposes. So we are here focusing on the demand side of the agriculture production, and we saw that mostly the instrumental policy instruments in G20 countries are through subsidizing solar irrigation system, both solar panel along with the solar supported pumps. And in most of the G20 countries, solar irrigation system has been subsidized either through different renewable energy promotional policies, or through specific policy implementations, like India has PM KUSUM. And in developed countries, clean technology, in developed countries, what happened? The clean technologies are market driven. So it based on the market driven price and everything. Focusing on the MSME sector, most policies are aimed to make clean energy practices more affordable for MSMEs by improving their access to credit, providing subsidies, energy audits, and training programs, such as credit guarantee in India. Under India's credit guarantee scheme is one of the access to credit program. Then funding for projects that use clean energy practices, like Australia did. It's one of the subsidy providing policy. Then training schemes or information support schemes we have for MSMEs, such as UK's Business Climate Hub, South Africa's training schemes, etc. From the training program side. And Japan uses actually energy audits to help MSMEs to identify ways in which they can improve their energy efficiency. So now focusing on the transport sector, in G20 countries, most of the policies are actually aimed towards either making sustainable or affordable transport system, or improving quality and convenience of sustainable transport infrastructure. So affordability then can be addressed through fiscal incentives, one through subsidies, such as countries providing subsidies so that consumers can purchase electric vehicles for less money, such as China, Germany, India, Italy, Japan, all have through tax rebates and tax benefits to make targeted products cheaper than less sustainable products. Like tax rebates, they have South Korea has tax rebates, then EU has tax benefit approaches, and also through, for example, exemption from import tax duty on EVs, electric vehicles, and less tax on CNG compared to diesel and petrol. So governments also invest in electric vehicle charging and CNG refueling infrastructure to improve the convenience of using an electric vehicle and also CNG vehicles. So for that, like Canada, Italy, Japan, they actually promote this type of infrastructure. But for inclusivity, we need to address the public transport thing, where the policies are missing little bit in G20 countries. Only what according to our study, we found South Africa, Turkey, UK, Russia, and Indonesia has the promotional policies who provide subsidies on bus fares and also launched nighttime bus services, so that it can be inclusive. Then social inclusion studies emphasize that demographic and socioeconomic characteristics are one of the driving factors in inclusive energy transition, and whereas renewable energy offers more scope for inclusion than conventional energy systems. So one of the most important inclusion is the gender inclusion, where gender disparities have really been addressed as part of national energy policies. And and specific to the three sectors we are speaking here, focusing here: agriculture, MSMEs, and transport. Whereas we can see that women are empowered, like they have significant empowerment in agriculture and MSME sector. We can see that the agriculture women empowerment index for Bangladesh is 0.749, like it's 74%, and for Western Highland, Guatemala, in Mexico, it's 69% almost. So it's so high. And for MSMEs also, report says around 20% of the enterprises are owned by women. So we can see that there is a significant women empowerment in these two sectors, though very little policy interventions are there. And also in the transport sector also, mostly in developing countries, hardly half of the women population actually avail public transport. Maybe there are other factors, but one of the factors are affordability, safety issues, etc. So since there is no such, almost to our knowledge, there is no such policy exist that include women empowerment in agriculture, specifically related to irrigation system, where it holds immense potential, and also in other two sectors as well. So we should focus on that. Only among the G20 countries, very few countries like India, Italy, Switzerland have credit support policies for women-headed MSMEs. And under the transport sector, only India and Mexico have addressed the issue of affordability and safety of women in the public transport sector. So now I hand over to my colleague Rumpa for the next session.
Thank you, Sareli. In this section, we'll talk about how media is covering clean energy transition and gender. Women are often the most affected by the energy crisis, and their participation in the clean energy transition journey have a very complex narrative. A growing number of media reports, particularly in the format of special features, long stories, and opinion pieces, have explicitly addressed the issue of women engagement with the process of energy transitions. Now, the key challenges that we are focusing on are the media reports on the gender implication of clean energy demand side policies in agriculture, MSMEs, and transport sectors. There is a need to represent the sectors of agriculture, MSME, and transport with respect to gender in the media. Now, the suggestions that we are looking for are covering more reports from on ground on clean energy demands, interventions in the agriculture, MSMEs, and transport. Since media plays a vital source of information, it can play a significant role in representing the gaps through the aspects of gender in these sectors. Hence, sensitizing the journalists on workshops on gender equity in the energy transition dynamic will help. Gender focus by the media on the aspect of policies on energy transition are the suggestions that we want to put forward. Now, the recommendations that the whole study, from the whole study, the recommendations that we are looking for are the missing dimensions of inclusion in demand side clean energy transition discourses, inadequate policy instruments to consider inclusiveness aspects, inadequate policy implementations in agriculture sector for inclusive transition energy. Although the share of energy consumption in agriculture is low, we should focus on it since agriculture is a cross-cutting sector. Reliability issues need to be addressed for promotion of demand measures. Missing gender disaggregated data on clean energy transition specific to agriculture, MSMEs, and transport sectors. And the last is addressing the normative gap through the media. Thank you. Now over to you, Palak.
Thank you, Sanili and Rumpa. Now we move on to the next segment, that is policy perspective, which will be chaired by Dr. Shelly Kedia. I request ma'am to take over the discussion.
Thank you so much, Palak. And we have now heard from the TERI study team, and they flagged various issues that become pertinent when we talk about demand side, energy demand side interventions, and in consideration of inclusiveness aspects, including gender, and what role various stakeholders, including policymakers and media, can play to kind of drive that discourse in the right direction. We now come to a very important segment of this particular event, which is on policy perspectives. And we are happy that we have with us, Shri Ram Adin Singh Patel, who is been in this sector for a very long time and has focused on aspects that relate to irrigation. He has studied from the Govind Vallabh Pant University of Agriculture and Technology at Pantnagar, and also was earlier with the Jain Irrigation Systems. And he's been with the Department of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare of the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, Government of India since 1992, and has a wealth of experience. I'm sure he will share very valuable perspectives based on his experience and expertise over the years. Mr. Patel, welcome for this session, and we thank you so much for accepting our invitation. We look forward to your intervention, sir, in this regard, specifically when we talk about energy demand and farmers' perspective in the agriculture sector. Over to you, Shri Patel.
Thank you, Madam Kedia, for giving an opportunity to speak on the energy nexus in agriculture sector. So, in my opinion, energy is required at every stage in the agriculture sector, from plowing to harvesting, and even after the harvesting, there is a energy need for cold chain and all those things. So, in the irrigation system, particularly in the this plowing and other operations, now it is in a mechanized form, and for every stage of mechanization, there is a need of the energy, and the maximum energy for the mechanization sector comes from the fossil fuel. So we have to think upon that due to this the fossil fuel. There is some use of due to use of some fossil fuel. There is some this pollution also is there. So we think of about our researchers to come with some other way to use the clean energy for this mechanization system also. But in the this irrigation sector, next come to the irrigation sectors. In the irrigation sectors, we in the Ministry of Agriculture implementing these micro irrigation systems, which consist of a sprinkler as well as a drip irrigation system. So in that, the maximum farmers are using the electric pumps, and now due to this PM Kusum programs, they and Ministry of Agriculture is also giving some this subsidy for using this solar system, basically solar pumps. So farmers are now adopting the solar pumps in irrigation sectors, and to particularly to irrigate the fields through micro irrigation systems, that is drip and sprinkler irrigation system. So that is the basic requirements. We are moving towards this clean energy of the solar energy systems, and the Ministry of New Renewable Energy is also helping through a scheme that is called PM Kusum. So that is the one aspect of and after that there are other requirements in the fertigation and fertilizer application and these pesticide applications and all those things. So that is also very much required for the agricultural sectors. So for that, these drone technologies they are now operating the drones. There is also a need of the energy, and that comes to this fossil fuel and other sources like electric batteries and all those things. So in the agriculture sector, we are going ahead with the clean and green energy instead of the fossil fuels. We are actually in the sector we are thinking about for the irrigation, particularly for the irrigation systems, we are replacing the diesel pumps by the electric and pumps and also these solar energy pumps. In the PM Kusum, as you know, from the Ministry of Renewable Energy, they have the systems. If farmers can also get income in the lean season when there is no requirement of the energy for the pump operations, they can supply the electricity energy generated through their solar systems to the grid, and ultimately they can get the this income also. So there is this solar energy pumps and solar energy system is one of the need of the day, need of the future, so that farmers can get this energy for their pump operations, for other purposes like threshing, winnowing, and other things that can operate through electric pump operated energy supplied by the solar system. So that all are we are thinking, and we are going ahead with those directions, and we are also in convergence with the PM Kusum Ministry of New Renewable Energy, and besides, Ministry of Agriculture is also giving subsidy on the solar pumps and all those things. So we are very much taken care of these solar pumps operation in our system particularly in the agriculture sectors. So that is from my side. Thank you very much for giving opportunity, Dr. Kedia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sri Patel, and thank you so much for sharing this valuable perspective and the fact that India has implemented the PM Kusum scheme to ensure energy security to farmers and also in a way promote clean energy in the agriculture sector and moving away from diesel fuel, especially. And I think, like, also just one of the objectives I want to reflag of this particular policy brief and initiative under the SDG Charter is to also draw implications considering the India's upcoming leadership that India will be taking for the G20 presidency. And we know that energy transition is going to be one of the working group, and the fact that on the demand side also, if India can push for stronger intervention and stronger consideration in this forum, that will be nice. And India itself has implemented the PM Kusum scheme, which is very relevant to this particular aspect, and could be definitely one of the aspects which India can highlight in and in terms of its knowledge sharing as well. So thank you so much again, Mr. Patel, and thank you so much for sharing these perspectives on the policies on the demand side with a specific focus on agriculture. We now move on to our next speaker, who is Dr. Ritu Mathur. And Dr. Ritu Mathur has been with TERI, but now is leading the modeling related activities on climate and energy at the NITI Aayog. And she's a senior researcher who's worked for many years on energy systems modeling. And again, like the way, like she's worked on, she comes up, her studies have examined projections from both supply as well as demand side. So, Dr. Ritu Mathur, I would now like to invite you to share your perspectives on inclusive energy transitions, and specifically if you have any insights to share related to energy demand interventions, particularly in sector which have huge socioeconomic implications, such as the agriculture sector, MSMEs, as well as transport. Over to you, Dr. Ritu Mathur.
Thanks, Shelly. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, okay. So I think, thanks for this background presentation as well. And I think the topic we are discussing is extremely important, given that, the transition in terms of technology, I think is talked about so much more. We sort of, from the broad things, sort of know that much more needs to be done in terms of energy efficiency on the demand side and supply side, in terms of looking at clean energy options, in terms of hard to abate sectors, and in terms of decarbonizing our power sector, as well as going towards electrification as much as possible to be able to move ahead on these transitions. But when we start looking at, how do we scale these up? How do we ramp these things out in making the transitions? That is where we get to the central problem of, centering this on people. And that is where I think this becomes extremely important to look at how to, how are we influencing the behaviors and how are we carrying people forward in the transition as we move forward. Now, again, the government, I think, has been very comprehensively looking at energy transition, and just in terms of the policies that are being put in place. I mean, on the technological side, whether we are looking at the hydrogen mission or we are looking at the scaling up of renewables, these are the progress from the technology side. But at the same time, you have a number of initiatives like the Skill India or the Startup India kind of initiatives, etc., which are also simultaneously being set up to comprehensively at being able to maneuver the social aspects as well as the technological aspects and the economic aspects together as we manage this transition. And that, I think, is an extremely important imperative in managing our transition properly. Now, just to also just take up as a case study, the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. So again, there about 9 crore new LPG connections were already rolled out by January of this year under the scheme, and over 28 crore households in India now have access to LPG. Now, again, if we just look at cooking, per se, this is something which is largely a women dominated activity, and any benefits which accrue from changeover to clean cooking are going to be incurred more on the women and children, like we know. So again, there was a recent study by the World Resources Institute, which also gave an estimate that PMUY has prevented at least 1.5 lakh pollution-related premature deaths in 2019 alone. So again, looking at the kind of initiatives and looking at the way forwards in the transition, where the gender dimension can be brought in, and how the aspects can be linked to all kinds of the social aspects as well, is extremely important. One point that you also mentioned right at the outset of this discussion was about data gaps. So I think that's again one area where we need to continue making our efforts in terms of mapping. For example, if we are talking about skills, we know we have to make a transition, and we have there are so many estimates about the number of jobs that are likely to be created by, say, the renewable energy transition, and so on. But where do we match the kind of skill sets which exist currently? What are the skill sets of the people who are currently in the regions where we might see the largest transitions? And how do we make this match with the kind of skill development and training programs that we are planning out? I think these kind of connects are very important to make. And in the transition, this is what we will continuously have to keep looking at. So one aspect becomes that of knowing our data. The second becomes that of threading our policies and initiatives with the correct data, and then planning it out through the transition. And also, like in terms of in terms of the agriculture sector, like was just mentioned, when we are looking at decentralized generation through solar panels for irrigation, how do we sort of also make sure that the people who are involved in the agricultural activities can increasingly enhance their incomes? How can they become more and more included in the system in terms of being able to get into affiliated activities or additional livelihood activities, such that, again, the incomes of people can also be enhanced, and there's greater participation of people in the economic output, as well as in the activities that they can entail, apart from what is required in the agriculture sector alone. I would extend the same thread to, say, the MSMEs as well, in terms of trying to, one, look at the data side of the gaps, to see what kind of skills would be forthcoming, what kind of skills would be needed in enabling the MSME transition. And of course, with the connect to modeling that I do have, I find the MSME sector clearly lacks detailed data of this kind, and more knowledge on that would surely help the policies to make the correct kind of connects in going forward. So much more effort definitely needs to be put on that side as well. So with that, I'll just stop at this point in time, and happy to come back for questions.
Thank you so much, Ritu, and thank you so much for flagging the data-related issues, because that is very important. As when it comes to decision making, and like you flagged that the data related to MSMEs is also something where we need to strengthen systems, including data collection system, and accordingly one can inform better policies as well. So thank you so much for sharing that insight. And with this, I think we've had two valuable policy perspectives. One related to the agriculture sector, and one considering the overall energy systems and implications on the demand side. And we've also seen some of the initiatives which India is taking. And again, like a very strong pitch from our side, we would be like we would like to see more on the aspects related to inclusion and policy instruments related to inclusion, including gender dimensions, when we look at the broader energy transitions discussion at the policy level. Of course, as researchers, as academics, we look at energy transitions in all aspects, but I think that needs a far more greater consideration when it comes to the present dominant narratives around energy transitions. So with this pitch, we do hope that also, with the upcoming presidency of India as, for the G20, we do hope, when considering various issues in the energy transition side, inclusiveness aspects, including in the energy demand side sector, is something that is well covered and framed, and something that, India can nudge, because as also was highlighted in the presentation, G20 countries at an aggregate level account for, in the demand side, more than about 76 to 78% of energy consumption. So we do think that demand measures and inclusiveness consideration therein becomes very important. So we do hope, just want to make a strong pitch, from behalf of TERI for that. And to all our colleagues like Ritu, to you, please push this from Niti Aayog. Mr. Patel, to you, please push this from the Agriculture Ministry as well. And with this, I think we have come to the end of this policy perspective segment of the event. And I'd like to hand over the screen back to Palak to take us to the rest of the event and the next segment of the event. Over to you, Palak.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now we will have a panel discussion with sector experts moderated by Dr. G. Mini. I request Dr. Mini to take over the discussion from here.
Hi, good afternoon, and a warm welcome to this roundtable, comprising of eminent panelists who will be deliberating and discussing the nuances of making energy transition more inclusive and just. I'm based on the concept of leaving no one behind. A just and inclusive energy transition will enhance human well-being and capabilities. It increases resilience and also drive innovation towards sustainable society at all levels. And we all know that it's no secret that an inclusive and a just energy transition can have transformational co-benefits for the achievement of the sustainable development goals as well. So primarily today, our panelist, as set by Shaili, she has already kind of set a context for what the roundtable today will comprise of. And so basically, our panelist will be, discussing some of the implications of inclusive energy transitions in the specific sectors of household energy access. That's mainly cooking and lighting, agriculture, MSMEs and transport more from a demand side perspective. The panelists will also look at some of the policy instruments which can promote more gender inclusive transitions in these sectors, and will also discuss some of the barriers and challenges to inclusive energy transitions, and including some of the data gaps and informations, more at a micro level. And the panelists can also focus on some of the good practices that exist in G2 countries. So the panelists can speak any of those topics, or probably they can even just speak anything that have been recently engaged in the just energy transition space. And without any further ado, let me first invite our first speaker, Mr. Abhishek Nath, Sector Head, Energy and Power, Center for Study of Science, Technology and Policy. And Mr. Nath has extensively worked on industrial energy efficiency, climate change, and more recently in the power sector. So over to you, Mr. Nath.
Thank you, Mini. I'm at first. Let me thank the organizers for inviting me to the event. And yes, I have worked a lot on industries, mainly MSMEs, and I continue to work on the supply side also now, the power sector. But yes, I would like to talk about MSMEs and what has already been pointed out about the data gaps that exist. Now, currently, we are involved in a study where we are trying to see how the demand for energy in the MSMEs can be uh, organized in such a way that we can provide the supply through greener sources. So I'll not go much into the study, but one of the points, and you have also talked about inclusive and sustainable growth. So one of the things I have found is the data gap is enormous. Every we have been working in the MSME sector since last, 25, 30 years, and there were uh, various interventions, starting with at some time of point, State Bank of India had started uh, this work, and then SIDBI had followed it up, and uh, the ministry, of course, keeps on working on it. UNIDO, World Bank, all of these have worked on various parts of the problem. But one of the things at every stage has been
one of the problems at every stage has been data collection. And data collection, while initially the problem was in the clusters, in some of the clusters which were well known, but now as we spread out, we see the problem exists even in those places where uh, interventions have already taken place. And there are two major problems. One is the willingness of the participant to share the data. That is one question. And the second question is whether the data is organized in such a way so as to address the problems of inclusion. I think on both these counts, we have been finding challenges at every level. No, you talked about gender issues. No, in the MSMEs, it is so difficult to capture gender related data. Uh, I mean, in one of the presentations earlier, it was pointed out about 20% of the enterprises are owned by females. But uh, and this I don't know internationally if this was the case or what. But in our interventions, it is extremely difficult to identify gender data. I mean, ownership uh, ownership of uh, MSMEs can be also in terms of the way uh, people will may register some unit in name of a female, but what is the actual ground level participation? That is one point. The second point is whether there is willingness on part of the participant to let you capture the data. I think these are some of the important problems that we face currently. What are the solutions? I think the solutions lie perhaps mostly in the approach we take to solve these problems. But I mean, I won't really like to venture into the solutions as of now. But I think our whole approach needs to become inclusive if we have to capture the gender related data and other factors of inclusiveness also. So that is my take, I think, initially. uh, if I can come back if there are further questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Nath, for highlighting a very pertinent issue. I think the data gaps and lack of availability of gender disaggregated data or all such data is something which we have been debating for a number of years now, and that is also something, as you rightly pointed out, we have not been able to plug some of those issues. And I mean, like the point you raised, how do you address some of the challenges related to willingness of the participants to share the data, and also the challenges associated with organizing data? I think these are some of the issues I feel we'll be debating it for a more longer time. And thank you for raising all those important aspects in this. And now let me call next speaker, my colleague, P. Anima, who is the communication and who is the media and communication head at TERI. And Anima has extensive experience on working in this in her previous assignment with the Hindu group. So Anima, over to you now.
Please unmute.
Thanks, Minnie. Taking this conversation forward on the presence, like looking at gender, the energy transitions, and the representation of it in the media, we again find the inherent complexity that we witness when you look at women as well as energy transition in general. While women remain the direct beneficiaries of a lot of schemes related to energy transition, they also have to deal with the historical problems related to access. And this complexity is what the media has also been trying to capture in reports that you see over the past 2-3 years. The renewable energy sectors sees a fairly large presence of women, about 32%. But what we are seeing in the media is their engagement from the ground, like the involvement of women in the ground, especially when it comes to initiatives on solar energy, their presence in the EV sector. Those things are covered by the media extensively. But again, when we look at the other aspects that we are looking at now, the demand aspect of it, from agriculture sector, the MSMEs, those kind of reports are few and far between. It is also because, it is a sector that is kind of emerging. It is an area that the media is increasingly interested in, but is also about a long-term plan to kind of address it in terms of sensitization of the media, in terms of inverting the lens of looking. How do we kind of, again, it has a lot to do with capacity building too, to kind of tilt the lens and look at from the other angle, the angle of demand, where we are kind of again stressing on turning the traditional methods of looking. So yes, it is an area where we are seeing media engagement. There is a rise in the media engagement with this sector, but this again, there is also kind of the need for greater engagement in looking at the gender aspect in particular. Yeah, any more feedback on that? Like, especially when it comes to representation of media and gender and energy transition? Because the stories from the ground, like the Tilonia, the solar mamas from Tilonia, these stories, individual stories tend to get picked up by the media extensively. But, kind of stringing together the aspects of policy and framing a larger narrative, which kind of addresses the issue of holistic energy transition is what, where we seem to be kind of lacking. But we also see that in spaces like opinion pieces, or even long form feature narratives kind of look at this more holistically, but we need more of that to kind of address the issue more comprehensively.
Thank you, Anima, for bringing in the media perspective and also kind of, telling that how a lot of sensitization in reporting, from the media side is very much required. I mean, although their stories have been captured, but still that kind of a sensitization and getting, more deeper into the issues from the media side is much required. I think that's something which is very interesting for all of us to know, because many times all the media gives like a more superfluous, more kind of an headlines, and how many men have participated or how many women have participated or what is the kind of benefits that is obtained. But when we kind of chase or try to break down those benefits and beneficiaries, then probably more and more stories of how those benefits have actually been translated on ground can be captured. Thank you, Anima, for bringing in that perspective. Now we move on to our next panelist, Dr. Abhishek Kar, and it's a pleasure for me to invite Abhishek Kar here, my ex-colleague and also a friend, who is the senior program lead, Council on Energy, Environment and Water. And Abhishek's primary interest is clean cooking and is working on behavioral change related interventions. Over to you, Abhishek.
Right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to the esteemed panelists out here. So, so I think as someone who has been working in the space of clean cooking for many years now, fortunately or unfortunately, I think there are quite a few issues which we need to look into, which I think have not got much attention. While, for example, there is a lot of public policy and attention around the issue of Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, which is a flagship scheme by the government of India, which completely changed the landscape of, in a radical manner. Like for example, before 2016, if you go and speak with someone regarding the trajectories and growth in LPG demand, the numbers were very, very different because those are based on previous years incremental approaches of increase in the in the growth rate of clean cooking of LPG use. But post 2016, because of a radical change in the policy landscape, the numbers, like now we have almost near universal LPG access, something which would be very difficult for anyone who has been working in this space pre 2016 to anticipate that we would be talking in 2021-22 that okay, now we have achieved to entirely the near universal LPG access. Now what's next? So I think one issue which in this entire issue around LPG in the even in SDG projections and growth, which you kind of miss out is that if there is a radical policy intervention, it can completely the things that may look dismal now and it may look dismal 10 years, 20 years down the line based on a trend analysis, the numbers can change. And it can happen not just because of a radical policy change like policy intervention like Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, but also disruptive technology. Say there is an electric induction stove that comes to the market at this point of time, which is extremely energy efficient than everything that is else in the market. So as per a CEW analysis, what we find is that as long as the the domestic tariff of the domestic tariff for electricity is below rupees 7.5 or 8, electric, and at the price point of where the LPG is around 1100 rupees, electric induction is a very competitive technology, but it is competitive at the price point of 7 or 8. But if a new disruptive technology comes in that can again change the focus, change the get the entire pricing in the range of say 4 to 5 rupees tariff range, which will make another clean cooking technology very affordable, very accessible to the people. So so while in this entire debate around SDGs we talk about a lot of what are the policy changes and policy prescriptions, I think we need to really push for and advocate for both innovations, which means investment in R&D, so that we can get this kind of disruptive technologies, and really pitch in for radical, bold policy prescriptions which go beyond the run-of-the-mill kind of incremental progress. The second thing which I would like to highlight is that there are many things like and this is coming from my experience of working in multiple countries apart from India, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, is that things that we take for granted in India. So for example, we have oil marketing companies where we have online booking system, where we have online receipts, where oil marketing company can track how the sales of LPG is happening. These are things which are completely at the level of fantasy for someone who is a policymaker in a country in sub-Saharan Africa, because the IT systems here are far more advanced and robust compared to what it is there. So in the spirit of South-South cooperation as championed by the Honorable Prime Minister, it would be very useful if we can try, if India can get into closer cooperation with the sub-Saharan African countries to tell them and and engage with them, there can be a lot of cross learning that is possible, because in the SDGs the struggle is not just for India but for many other countries. And so if there is a strong South-South cooperation in terms of, at least in the clean cooking energy space, I think there's so much to learn, so much to unlock, because when India has done such a massive program of reaching out to 80-90 million households under the PMUI program, it has also made a lot of learnings which may not be formally captured, but it is in the system there. So if you speak with a field officer in say Indian Oil who has been chasing and trying to get a paperwork done when the internet connectivity is not so good, so these challenges, these lessons that have been learned, which is at this point in the memory of various institutional members, if this can be formalized and then there is a concrete plans and steps taken up, so that when the capacity building happens for the other countries in the south, in the global south, that they do not repeat the same mistakes, because the mistakes have already been made. And we have paid some price for that mistake. And so if those people, if they're able to avoid those mistakes, it is going to make the access to clean cooking more affordable and more easily expandable even for the sub-Saharan African countries. The third thing which I would like to focus upon, again keeping the fulcrum around the issue of clean cooking, which is something which which I'm a little more aware of than other things in the energy space, is the issue around what should be done. I think there's a kind of a disconnect between the research community and the policy making community, and I think this disconnect is something that is not very easily understandable and translatable between these two domains. So, for example, we focus as researchers a lot more on pilot projects. Okay, let's do a RCT there, let's do a field trials there. But if we go back and we tell the policymakers that let's do pilots, the policymakers at a scale of India, when you're running the country at the scale of India, you have to make rollouts which are implementable quickly, fast across the spaces. So there is a lot of implementation science research that is missing, and which we need to bridge the gap between the 5 village pilot and a national scale rollout. So this intermediate scales to ensure that, okay, that in one place we have done some demonstration project, it has been fantastic, but maybe that is not replicable in other places, because something that was the magic in that place, which can be, say, for example, there's a trusted NGO, and trust factor matters a lot in a good implementation science, but that will not be available when you're doing a large scale rollout. So this bridging the gap between small demonstration projects and a national rollout, this middle path, I don't think there has been enough effort done in terms of methodologically evaluating the various steps that should be taken for evaluation of this process, and a structured way of analyzing whether a successful demonstration project is actually scalable enough for national scale. So I think there's a lot of knowledge gap in terms of this kind of a large scale rollout from a small pilot. The fourth thing which I wanted to emphasize upon is that while there is a lot of discussion around the issue of how do we make people use more, say, LPG, I think our focus needs to move beyond a technology and be more technology agnostic in the process. What I mean by that is, okay, there is a household which is using firewood, they are using LPG partially, and rest is still using firewood, which of course, as we know, there are several studies have established, until and unless you use LPG exclusively or near exclusively, the health gains are limited, because it's a non-linear scale in terms of how the health benefits happen. However, rather than just think about how do we promote more LPG for such households, and there are like millions of households in India today who are at that stage, who have access to LPG in their households, but because of host of factors, there's a limitations in terms of the level of usage. So what we can think, so what we can do in that case is we can, like so because there can be technology specific restriction. For example, hello, yeah, so maybe there is a technology specific restriction. So LPG, say for example, in a household is not scalable beyond a point. So depending on the LPG's restrictions, it is not doable. So rather than push the household towards using more LPG, why not think of it as a more of a clean energy mix? And so, okay, fine. The household is not using LPG. We want to win the household away from firewood. Can we try electric induction stove as a combination in addition to LPG? So unfortunately or fortunately, because PMOI has got such massive prominence in the clean cooking space, I think the focus, the research questions, the policy questions are around how do we encourage people to use more LPG. We should rather think about it, how do we get people to use more clean energy mix? in the recent months, there's been a lot of improvement and massive progress has been happening in terms of both commercialization and technology innovation around biogas. So our focus should really move away from narrow technology specific research questions or intervention ideas towards thinking, okay, there's a bucket of clean energy options. How do we push households towards using that bucket of clean energy options, irrespective of what technology it is, which is doable, manageable, and more affordable? And I think having that kind of approach can be useful in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhishek, for really bringing in a lot of issues onto the table, especially some of the changes that is required for to bring about those behavioral changes in the consumption pattern. Especially you talked about, bringing about radical policy decision, technology innovation, and the right pricing, all those factors affecting the changes in the consumption pattern. And also another important aspect which you talked about, a more strengthened South-South cooperation for cross-fertilization of ideas, and also for more for technology knowledge transfer. So that's something which is an important point which you have highlighted. And another important aspect which you have very aptly raised is the disconnect between the research and policy. Like, how do we really scale up those small demonstration sites or those small demonstration pilot projects? Like, how do you justify, that to be rolled out at a more national level? The kind of you have called out for more studies, the methodologies being more rigor, and all those should kind of feed into the policy framework. And that's all the important points you have raised, Abhishek. And also, of course, you have also brought about, giving a bucket of renewable energy, solutions and options to the household, so that they can pick and choose, based on what suits them the best. Yeah. Thank you for raising all those important points. And now it's my pleasure to invite Professor Subhish Bhattacharya for this panel discussion. And Professor Subhish Bhattacharya is a professor of net zero carbon energy systems at the University of Surrey and the editor-in-chief of Energy for Sustainable Development. And Professor Bhattacharya specializes in multidisciplinary applied research on energy for sustainable development and has delivered impact generating, award winning, life changing outcomes. Over to you, Professor Bhattacharya.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. If I may, can I use some slides?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Hopefully, you will be able to see them, but let's see. It's yeah. So, the way I have organized this presentation is to look at inclusive energy transition from an SDG perspective. So my talk would be kind of covering a few things. I tend to emphasize more on leaving no one behind. So that's the main objective of the Sustainable Development Goals, that we are trying to achieve a transformation that should not leave anyone behind. And if we try to do that, then what are the implications? What are the perspectives that might come, challenges that might come, and then some interventions that could support perhaps this process? So this would be around these areas that I will talk about. Now, if the objective is to have a transition of the energy system that leaves no one behind, then what we have to aim for is a system which is unsustainable at the moment, and then convert that, transform that into a sustainable low carbon, decarbonized net zero system in the future uh, over a certain period of time. Now, whether that happens in 2050, 2030, 40, 60, that's a matter of discussion. But as per different plans and kind of commitments, uh, the intentions are that countries are planning and committing themselves to the decarbonization of their economies by a future target date. So that if that is the aim, we cannot just look at that transition from a technological perspective alone, because ultimately, if the objective is that we want to take everybody with us so that there is no one left behind, then it has to also move and transform itself from whatever the current situation is, which is mostly unjust, unfair, to a more fair and inclusive system, so that everyone is included wherever they are, and not a single person is excluded from that transition process. So that would require us to kind of, if we take that as the ultimate objective, and if we look at where we are now, so backtracking that and backcasting that process of transformation, we can then look at what could what are the steps that we have to follow, and how perhaps we could approach the problem to make it more to reach the objectives that we are aiming for. And in that process of inclusive growth, inclusive development, inclusive transition, it's not about just one location. We have to consider both urban areas, rural areas, all the locations on the in a given country context, uh, all sorts of settlements, whether formal, informal, different gender aspects, conditions of this of the users. But it's not only limited to households. I think that's also something important to emphasize here, that in the debate about inclusive growth or just transition, the focus has been on a section of the population. ILO focuses on the labor. So the labor movement has created this term of just transition. But if we are really serious about sustainable development goals and the commitment that was made in terms of leaving no one behind, then it cannot be limited to only laborers or only households. We have to focus on all users. So small users from the commercial side, transport sectors, business sides, agricultural aspects. So industries, small industry, large industry, big industries. So all encompassing kind of engagement would have to be considered in that process of transition. And that's what I think is missing at the moment in the discourse, in the discussions, because even in the academic literature, this gets more dominated by a certain ideas, certain philosophies, as well as maybe line of thinking. And very few people are really considering that problem of leaving no one behind and the challenges that would be there in terms of taking this agenda forward. So what I just mentioned before, that the system-wide interactions would be required, um, it it this diagram tries to capture all different types of activities and actions. So it would be when we are trying to transit to a low carbon process, low carbon systems. Our residences, our homes, they have to be transformed. Our transportation system has to be transformed. Our energy systems, energy power generation, they have to be transformed. Their way of transporting the energy and using the energy, that has to be transformed. The landscape, the agricultural activities, as well as the businesses, they have also to be transformed into a greener set of activities, so that the entire decarbonization process can succeed. But in that process, again, we have to we have been people are or the discussions have been always at a more aggregated level. When we bring it down to the local levels, there are lots of kind of disconnectivities that arise, and how this will happen at the local level, at the bottom up approach level, that is not always very clear. So there are inconsistencies in terms of building regulations, planning permissions, use of resources, and often there has been a very significant focus on technocratic approaches to the solution. So like taking the example of the UK, there has been a very significant emphasis on electric vehicles, and the government has decided to ban any sale of new fossil fuel driven vehicles after 2030. But that perhaps is only one component of this entire solution package, and focusing only on one solution and choosing a technology and promoting it may not always serve the purpose of making it inclusive. And that's where the question comes at each level of the decision making, whether we are taking kind of cognizance of what is actually required to take the entire population with us, and whether that frame of mind is being applied at the decision making process or not. That remains to be we need to investigate that. And this is where the problem is occurring, because of the disconnects that are existing between the levels of decision making and the decision making in a silo. And this is one area where I think major changes would be required. Now, in terms of the transition, then, if we are trying to make it more inclusive and taking it to everybody, then a few questions we have to always try and ask. So, can the solution or the options that we are proposing be afforded? Can everybody afford that solution? Are there people or sections of the population who are at the risk of leaving behind? So there may be cases where people may not be able to afford them, and unless they are willing, they are taken alongside with the solution that is being promoted, then we are going to create a divide between those having the solution and those not having the solutions, and then it does not really serve the purpose of sustainable development goals that we are trying to achieve. And then this is also important to ask, are there ways of protecting those who might be at the risk of being left behind? So can we devise a mechanism of protecting, and can those solutions, the protection mechanisms, be again sustainable? So there are always challenges. Financial support is one aspect that has been, financial intervention is one instrument that has been used in many countries, but then they may not be always sustainable. They cannot be continued forever. We have seen this with LPG in many countries. To promote LPG, subsidies were given, and then it becomes very difficult to remove them over time. So that's one example, and this has been the case with fossil fuels, and trying to promote them at one point of time, but often we don't try to learn from these mistakes that we have done in the past. Then the next issue is, can everybody have access to this? Can everybody access the services that we are trying to propose or promote? And are there areas where they may not be reaching? And if there are access issues, accessibility issues, then how are we taking everybody with us? If the solution that we are promoting is it adequate? Can everybody meet their needs with these solutions? And are there sections of the population who might be facing risks of again not having adequate supply, not having adequate resources for them? Can these resources be available all the time reliably? Is reliability an issue? Are there concerns about of meeting the needs when we need it, wherever we need it, and are those solutions that we are promoting, are they acceptable? Are they acceptable to the users? And if the solutions that are being promoted are not acceptable, then again we are not carrying everybody with us. We are not getting their support, and this we have seen this happening in many cases. Cooking solutions is one example. There has been, I think, over the past 30 years or so, many trials with cook stoves, and cook stove designs have always happened in the laboratories without looking at the user's perspective, and they have failed. So still, that's why people are just stacking some of those cook stoves and not using them and continuing their traditional practices. So basically, the solution that is being proposed is not acceptable. It has not been adopted by the users, and that we still have the risk of facing similar challenges when we are trying and promoting some solutions, some innovative ideas from maybe the supply side, from the technology side, not focusing, not keeping in mind the user's own needs. And this is something that I think we always try to promote, maybe push for solutions, ideas in a hurry, and then we find that okay, we have made mistakes. We are not always sure of what we have done, and this kind of issues we have not always learned from our past mistakes. And I think these are some of the questions that we need to always ask for our transition process. I don't have solutions. I don't have answers to them, but I think asking right questions is the starting point, good starting point. And if we ask right questions, then there is a likelihood that we will get the right answers. So from those questions, I think what I identify as some of the challenges would be that, yeah, there is a problem in terms of engagement with the right set of stakeholders. The people who are at the risk of being marginalized, their voice perhaps is not there. Their voice is not always heard. So we still continue and try to impose majority views on some of them, and that may not lead to results or solutions that are acceptable to them. And ultimately, we are not making progress in terms of leaving no one behind. One challenge has always been the resource challenge, particularly in terms of financial resources. Support mechanisms, they do not always reach the target population, and they may not be, as I mentioned that just a few minutes before, that they may not always be a sustainable solution. So we have to have a clear way of re-engaging and kind of trying to solve this problem, how users might be able to have adequate resources. And that perhaps requires going back to the diagram that I was showing, that interaction. And that interaction where it can connect with the local solutions and then create a mechanism which is creating adequate benefits for shared benefits amongst the users, and then that can take everybody to a level of better life. So better living conditions, better empowerment, that would be an ideal kind of situation where everybody then would have sufficient resources to support their transition. And it also then requires moving away from profits generated locally and then siphoned away. It would require reinvestment of some of those profits locally so that it can create the conditions for development and sustaining that development over the longer term for future generations as well. Again, as the technology is changing, lots of innovations are happening, but maybe not all users are equally capable of participating in those innovative solutions. So we need to then think of improving their capacity to participate so that they can make the maximum benefits out of these solutions and become more empowered as well. So again, this could be using smart solutions, new opportunities that are coming through maybe trading businesses, trading activities that could appear in the at the local levels, at the national levels, at different levels of the system, and opportunities that could then lead to a better conditions of living for them. But also this is related to the level of education as well as knowledge sharing, and so capacity building perhaps is something that would be essential to address these challenges there. Understanding and awareness, I think because of the level of problem that we have in this area of transition, we do not really appreciate what are the challenges, who are facing the challenges. We may not be knowing them well. So targeting those who are at the risk of being marginalized and at the risk of maybe falling behind, and how then we can take them along with us. That is that understanding has to be is inadequate at the moment and perhaps requires attention. And then yeah, the protection arrangements have focused mostly on financial aspects, but maybe that's not adequate and they're not always reaching the targeted sections. And beyond just financial arrangements, other protection protection arrangements perhaps would be also required. So from there, the interventions that I would suggest is, again, capacity building, creating these opportunities for better living, which I have mentioned already, identification of the vulnerable section of the population, and then supporting them in a targeted manner. But most importantly, I think generating awareness and sharing the information widely, more making it more accessible. I think that's important there as well. So again, it remains quite broad, but I would be happy to discuss any points you might have if you need any clarification on this. So that's all. Thank you from my side. I will just stop the sharing part. Stop it here. Stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Bhattacharya, for this very, very insightful aspects about, just energy transition, because we keep talking a lot about just energy transition and no one leaving no one behind. But then you have rightly identified some of the, the practical challenges when it comes to affordability, accessibility, reliability, acceptability. I mean, these are some of the practical challenges, that's been faced by the most vulnerable and the marginalized, and very aptly put about lack of voices, lack of income, lack of awareness, and and you also highlighted some of the conditions which we need to create, the most enabling conditions which we need to create for the voiceless and for the marginalized, so that even they also step up, and be ready to be included in this whole just energy transition. And thank you so much for raising all those pertinent issues, and the challenges, and giving us some kind of solutions as well. Now I would like to invite our next panelist, Dr. Shrestha Banerjee, Director, India Just Transition Center, International Forum for Environment, Sustainability and Technology. Dr. Banerjee's current area of work include just transition and climate change, mining and benefit sharing, environmental justice, and participatory governance. So over to you, Dr. Banerjee.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for being patient. Actually, I was not in good health today, but fortunately I could join in. In fact, I'm in Jharkhand also, so there might be some power issues, but nonetheless. So unfortunately, I missed on the earlier part of the discussion because both of health and this travel reasons. But few things I would like to point out as we are talking of just energy transition and towards the SDG goals, because that's, I believe, the focus of the discussion. In fact, because otherwise it's such a complex issue, such a multifaceted issue, one can go on and on. And I don't think any of us has explored the complexities of it in real terms in India. In fact, we all are in many ways scratching the surface. Considering the diversity of the fossil fuel regions, and for India, currently the discussion is much focused on coal. And also the kind of, particularly the distribution of labor force that is in the country, and where also gender has to play a role, because there is very low participation of women in extractive industry, particularly in well-paid and formal jobs. But where there are a lot of women exists in the just transition question is when we talk of informality or indirect sectors which are dependent on coal, other sectors, one of which I was looking at the key points of discussion, which is rightly focusing on MSMEs. And when we talk of just transition, and I will focus much on gender here a little bit, because there are there are two key issues which is important for gender, and which are also tied to today's focus. Number one is the participation of women in a dignified way in a transition process, particularly when we are trying to plan a new economy. How do they get decent jobs? What kind of work they are going to do, and how that can be ensured? That's number one. The second thing is we are also talking about access to clean cooking fuel, which has a lot of gender dimension, because women are the one often who are procuring the other, the non-clean sources of fuel such as coal or firewood, and they are the ones who are also cooking and using it, which also has implications for indoor air pollution and women and children health. Now, both of these are important issues to address when we are planning for a just transition. Because number one, if we look at the statistics in India's coal regions, even, with the government of India penetration of LPG, there is a huge amount of dependence on coal as a cooking fuel. And when we undertook the study of Ramgarh district of Jharkhand, which is a 150-year coal economy, and very recently we finished a study in a future coal district, which is old also, but which is going to be India's top in the next 10 years, Angul district of Orissa. The use of coal as cooking fuel is not very different. And Angul is much more prosperous than Ramgarh in many ways. The reason is because till the time there is cheap coal available in local market, it is very difficult to have supply and penetration of clean cooking fuel in the household. And because these are low income families, they get coal at a much lower price, and sometimes in areas of Jharkhand, it is by gathering coal by themselves. They don't even buy it. So if someone of a low income family, practically having household income below rupees 10,000 per month, it is very difficult to them by education or whatever we want to convince them to buy LPG or use LPG. So the primary thing when we are talking of just energy transition, one is to looking at the informal coal economy, where coal is being gathered by these people, sold in the local market, people are buying and using it, which does not factor in the very formal and sanitized discussion of just transition focused on formal workers and formal economy. This is a very difficult question, though, to address, because first of all, you do not have the number of people who are working in this. So there is a lack of data, which requires deep down studies to understand this informality, quantify it, and to see what interventions can be planned. And if I have to suggest one intervention, I would say that it is extremely important, and this is something that we have a very different experience from the Western world. For us, just transition will be a question of a deep socio-economic transition, because we need deep social sector investments and development intervention to plan this transition well. Because unless we do that, the informal economy, the gender equality that exists as part of it, poor education levels among women, their poor participation rate in the workforce, even when they're working as informal laborers with the lowest wages, this all cannot be addressed. So if just transition has to invest, I was making 3 points. One would be that social sector intervention as a broad-based development intervention. Second thing is targeted investments in education. And this I'm trailing from my personal experience, doing surveys and discussions with various focus groups, particularly women. And all of them think that education can be liberating. And I have been always telling this, that when we plan just transition, we talk of skilling, reskilling, which is extremely important. But at the same time, we are talking of creating a workforce which is of future. And one of the key investments will be education, because we do not want people to do the same kind of menial jobs that they have been working, but they can be better prepared for the new economy. So the second intervention will be in education. And the third intervention, which again is a very currently is being discussed all over, is what will be the governance mechanism, because development planning is nothing new in India. And inclusive planning has been talked about for years, starting with the Planning Commission when they started to talk about district development plans. There have been Gram Panchayat development plannings, all the laws have emphasized on it. But the challenge is that it never happens. So the thing that just transition and just energy transition, in fact, what we are talking of, we have to do is we need to actually have an implementable governance system where we can ensure that people's participation happens, and particularly women are represented. Just saying that, everyone has to be part of this process, it should be bottom up, these all are said and done. I don't think there is any novelty. We all talk about this, even we write about it. But the challenge is, how do you make it happen? And the only way, I personally believe, and I think many of us today are recognizing this more and more, that having academic discussions, we all are researchers, think tanks coming from various backgrounds, it is very important to engage local level institutions to build the local capacity. And it should be a sustained engagement. It can't be an engagement of 2 month, 3 month, 1 year. We are talking of a 40-year transition process. And in countries where it has been successful, it has been because local level institutions have been created to sustain this process. So I personally believe that if we are talking of gender equality in the new transition, if we are talking of how equality can be built in, and some of the biggest barrier, as I said, will be the informality, not just the informal workers of the coal economy, but the informal economy that exists in these areas. And to do that, you need a long-term transition planning through local level engagement. And of course, organization will have to generate a lot of data. In fact, I was reviewing very recently that the government of India has come up with new labor codes, trying to have some social security measures. Now those are to be seen how it gets executed, but definitely labor reforms will be a key component of it if we want to plan this transition. And I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Banerjee, for really bringing out some of the most important issues by saying, just transition is not, just energy transition is not automatic, and we really need to address the entrenched, gender norms at a more deeper level before we kind of address just transition at a more, macro level or at a more superfluous level. And also, thank you for again raising other few other important points, like, how we need, socio-economic transitions and more such social sector interventions to make this energy transitions to make it more smooth. And you have also rightly talked about the importance of education, where a lot of, investments, a lot of initiative has to happen in a lot of other sectors as well to make the just energy transition more reality. I mean, be it, governance, or be it active engagement of the local partners and local participation to make it more inclusive. So thank you for bringing in, a lot of other, complementary and supplementary factors to make this just transition more inclusive. Yeah, thank you so much. And I think we have come at the end of this session, and I don't know, like, how to really summarize this whole session, because we have really got a lot of interesting insights from different speakers, based on their own work and based on their engagement either with the practitioners or with the policy makers. So just to give to sum up, the important aspects that were kind of raised today is, the first and foremost was the importance of, the data gaps and how we need to plug some of the data gaps, because we keep talking about, poor quality data, or the lack of gender disaggregated data, or even, the whole process of, the data collection itself. So that was an important point that was raised today. And we also had other important discussions, like, the whole the media's outlook, towards capturing some aspects of the marginalized, vulnerable, or women. How the whole media also needs a little more sensitization to dwell deeper into those issues. And another important aspects that was also raised is about, bringing about some radical policy decisions, technology innovations and changes in pricing to bring about those radical changes in the consumption pattern of the consumers to move towards a more just transition. And also the panelists highlighted about the need for south-south cooperation for broader cross fertilization of ideas and knowledge transfer. So that's something which is was very important aspects were highlighted. And when we all talk about moving towards a just energy transition, the panelist also has highlighted the challenges that comes with the just energy transition, in terms of affordability of the marginalized, accessibility, in terms of reliability and the challenges of the marginalized, and where they do not have that voices, and where there is a lack of capacity. And these are some of the important aspects, the basic challenges, and coming up with some practical solutions to address those challenges is an important highlight of today's discussion. And and I mean, just now, Dr. Banerjee also has raised how this whole processes of a transition should not be just looked at from a more macro and perspective, which will bring in only a more myopic view, and should not be working more in silos, but rather look at into other sister policies or other complementary aspects in terms of education, social enterprises, in terms of governance, where all those aspects and all those factors also play a very important role in bringing about this kind of transformative changes, or to bring about this kind of a just transition. And so it's been quite an interesting discussion with all the eminent panelists, putting forth their points, their issues, and this has definitely enlightened TERI's team, and a lot of aspects of this will definitely help us to enrich our own policy briefs and our own future works on just energy transition. And so I sincerely thank all the panelists today, and then thank you for coming here and bringing in a wide perspective into this discussion. And thank you all. So now I would like to hand back to the chair, over to Shaili.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mini, for moderating the session. Now I request Ms. Ritu Mathur, Associate Fellow, TERI, to deliver the closing remarks. And vote of thanks.
Thank you, Palak. Thank you to all our panelists and speakers who took out time to join us today. And we've received some valuable recommendations and perspectives. And going forward, we will be including these in our knowledge document for SDG 7. So thank you for that. And I would like to thank Dr. Shelly Kedia and Dr. Mini for chairing and moderating the session today. And I would also like to thank all our TERI colleagues and participants who joined us today. I would also like to tell you that tomorrow we have the final virtual dialogue, and the topic of that is lifestyle and sustainable consumptions. We are putting up the registration link in the chat box now. So if you have not registered, please do, and do attend that tomorrow as well at the same time, 2 to 4. And we look forward to seeing you. And, just any last thoughts, Dr. Shelly or Mini, otherwise we can just conclude.
I think it's been a very enlightening, rich discussion today. We have learned a lot, and I hope that all of you have feel the same as well. And that's it. We look forward to staying in touch with all of you and to many more such events and engagements in future.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.